Hello there. Welcome back to another edition of Dad, I Want to Hear Your Story. And today we are going to be continuing in the section of parents and grandparents. So I have my bookmark here. Let's go ahead and dive in. So first question is, what was your mother's maiden name? Knash. Knash. Mother's maiden name. Not sure what else I can add to that, but that's what her maiden name was. Next question. Do you know from what parts of the world your mother's family originates? Eastern European, Polish, and Slovakian. So there was always the running joke that my mom's family were dumb Polacks. Because when I was growing up, that was a cliche that anybody from Poland was stupid. And there was a whole, you know, dumb Polak jokes, stupid Polak, the whole bit. But anyway, that's where my mom's family was from. Do you know your father's mother's maiden name? No, I don't. I've heard the family history of both my mother and my father. I just don't remember a lot of it. So if I really needed to get into nitty gritty details, I'd either have to ask them or my sisters or dig it up. So I have no idea what my father's mother's maiden name was. And it says, do you know what part or parts of the world your fathers originate from? I'm going to say someplace in Central Europe. I think there was Eastern European in there, someplace, maybe German, a little bit maybe, but definitely Central to Eastern Europe. I think. I think. Okay. How did your parents meet? So I've heard this story before, and I hope that I get it correct. And if not, I embellish a little bit. Nobody's going to care. So my parents, who both lived in the same town, Honesdale, Pennsylvania, there was a restaurant there, kind of like a drive-up restaurant diner. All of the high school kids would hang out there. There was a jukebox and music, and they could get food to eat. And so it was the typical teenage hangout spot. And as my father would tell me, he went there one night with a bunch of his friends, and there were a bunch of girls there sitting at a table, and somehow, some way, he like snatched her hat. She had like a, I don't know whether it was like a knit cap or some kind of hat, and he, grabbed it, and he said he stuffed it inside his shirt. Well, then as the evening goes on, she goes, "Hey, who has my hat?" And my father was playing it pretty coy, and, "Oh, I don't know who has your hat." And it turns out, he had it, and then she found out he had it, and they started talking, and one thing led to another, and he takes her home, he drives her home, and according to my father, now my mother might dispute this, but according to my father, quote, my mom, would not get out of the car until he kissed her. So take that with a little grain of salt or whatever, but that's the story that I remember being told on how my parents met, and my dad stole her hat, and the rest is history. And I think he actually did kiss her that night. I'm pretty sure he did. How would you describe their relationship? So I wrote down, you don't know how good or bad a relationship is until you see a dramatic change, right? So if you reflect back on your life and you look at your parents, whether it was me or if you're not in our family and you're watching this, you might say, "Yeah, it was a pretty good relationship," or, "No, it was pretty terrible." But if there was ever a dramatic change, you would certainly notice it. So my parents, when I was about 13, went on a thing called Marriage Encounter. It's a program that's offered by the Catholic Church, and it's this, well, it's a marriage counseling thing. It usually lasts over the course of a weekend, and you married couples go to this retreat house, and they listen to talks that are prepared by other couples. And usually these couples share things about their marriage and their life, and then couples like my parents would reflect on what they said, and then they would write answers to questions that were given to them, and then they would discuss. So everything from, let's say, finances in the marriage, intimacy, raising children, why do you do certain things, likes, dislikes, blah blah blah, just a lot of things. And it's a weekend that is meant for couples, not necessarily couples that are struggling in their marriage, but couples to dialogue again, to open communication. Because if you're married, the worst thing that can happen in a relationship is you don't talk to each other, or you don't discuss things, even if they're uncomfortable. So my parents came back from this weekend, and I would say their marriage wasn't terrible. In hindsight, it was rocky. They had some rocky points in their marriage, and there was even a rumor of infidelity on my mother's part. I don't know if it actually happened, but there was, maybe it was being pursued or somebody was pursuing her. But anyway, after this marriage encounter weekend, their relationship really changed, and they became more loving to each other. They became more loving to us three kids. We kind of thought it was really weird that the way they were acting, but I think it was pretty good. I think they changed a lot from their marriage encounter weekend and changed it a lot for the better. What were your parents' occupations? So my dad was a blue collar worker. He worked at the place, Sussex County Battery Station, and he did everything from, he used to change tires, he rebuilt alternators and starters, he did the inventory for them. He had lots of little jobs, or not little jobs, different jobs while he worked at that place. I don't remember him ever being like a full blown mechanic where he would, work on people's cars. I mean, I suppose he did, but he had many different jobs while he was there. And then after Sussex County Battery, he went to work for a place called Household Engineering, and he did oil burner service. So oil burners, gas burners, heating. He did some commercial stuff, mostly residential, but he did that. And then when he was, I think he was 50, late 40s, early 50, he actually went out on his own and started his own business, D&M Heating, which Don and Marion, or could have been Don and Mike, because he wanted me to go into business with him. But he did that. And my mom, well, she was a homemaker primarily. And growing up, she always had some type of part time job or part time thing that she did. I mean, growing up, I remember she would go to an architect's office once a week to clean the office. She did that. She worked at various restaurants, like little delis in town, working behind the counter. She worked at Hayaks Market. She worked in the school, one of the elementary schools, as a lunch lady. She later in life, she went back to school after all three of us kids had left home. She went back to school for massage therapy, so she did massage therapy out of the house. There was never a time when I don't remember my parents working. Just something. There was always something that they were doing. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, but she worked, and she always would do these type of jobs where she could be home after school and home to take care of us. And it wasn't until later in life, when we were more self-sufficient, that she might have a job that where she didn't come home until like close to dinner time. Next question. Did either of them have any unique talents or skills? Is hard work a skill? Because my parents were the epitome of hard work. It was ingrained in them growing up. It was ingrained in me. And whatever they did it to 100%. And I think that's, for the most part, has rubbed off on me. Next question. Did any of them serve in the military? Yes, my dad served in the Army. I'd say it was probably the reason why, or one of the reasons why, I went into the Army as well. Next question. What is a favorite family tradition that was passed down from your parents or grandparents? And the only thing I could think of was the pig. So if you've never heard, growing up when I was in high school, the English teacher at the high school was a family friend, Mike Filipowski, and one day he was over our house and he saw this wooden. It was a wooden cutting board, small wooden cutting board shaped like a pig. It was in the silhouette of a pig, and I don't know where my mom picked it up, but it was always in our kitchen. And Mike Filipowski thought it was hideous. He just thought it was the ugliest thing in the world. And the joke was, Mike, take the pig, take the pig. You want the pig? And he's like, no, I don't want the pig. So somebody gave it to him as a gift. And it was a gag gift. Well, he wound up giving it back to that person. I think it was either my mother or my sister. So it became this family tradition of holidays, and any time that there was a gift to be given, you didn't know if you were going to get the gift or get the gift of the pig. My parents actually sent it to my friend Terry when we were in Alaska to have him give it to me as a gift. He kind of botched it. That's a whole nother story. But anyway, that was the family tradition for the longest time of passing this pig along as a gift. What are a few of your favorite things that your mother or father would cook for the family? So my mother would make pierogies, which is obviously a Polish dish. She made German potato salad, which I love her German potato salad. Um, SOS, it's called shit on a shingle, and I wouldn't say it was a favorite thing, but it was the thing that stuck out. And the regular name is chip beef on toast. It's this dried beef that you would buy in a package, and you make like a gravy with a flour gravy, and you would add this dried beef to it, and you would serve it on pieces of toast. And in the army, my father would they would call it SOS, and at home it was just chip beef on toast, and we would eat that. I have never outside of my house or growing up had chip beef on toast, but if you look it up, it's a real thing. My mother makes a fantastic coleslaw. It doesn't have mayonnaise, it has vinegar in it, and it's always a party favorite. And then I would be remiss if I didn't say on my father's side, my father and I would go hunting and we'd either get venison, which we ate, or squirrel. So if you see a squirrel running up and down a tree or gathering nuts, just remember that my dad and I would shoot squirrels, bring them home. I would go down the basement with the squirrels, skin them, gut them, clean them up, and come upstairs with a couple of squirrels. And my mom would cook them in a crock pot, and she'd make a crock pot of squirrel stew, and we would eat that. So good stuff. What were your grandparents like on your mother's side? So I never knew my grandfather. His name was John Paul, and they called him JP. I never knew him. I never met him. I was alive, but I was too young to remember him. So I think he might have passed away somewhere between 4 and 5 years old. I don't remember him. But I do know, and I remember my grandmother because she died when I was a teenager. My grandmother was the sweetest woman. She was, think of like a grandmother that's kind of squishy, plump. Just, she was a peach. She really was. And she was hysterical because she had dentures, and when she ate, you would hear them clinking in her mouth. They would make this unique sound, and me and my cousins would always go, "Grandma, Grandma, take your teeth out, take your teeth out," and she'd stick her tongue out, and her teeth would pop out, and with her teeth hanging out, and then she'd suck them back in, and we thought that was hysterical. Grandma, Grandma, take your teeth out, and they'd come out. So we thought that was pretty funny. And the other thing that she would do, and I don't know why she did this, but if she was busy doing something, you went, "Hey, Grandma," and she wouldn't say what, she would say how. So she'd be cooking, or she was always cooking every single time. We went to Pennsylvania from New Jersey to visit my mom's family and my father's family, but mostly my mom's family. And Grandma was always cooking. She was always making something in the kitchen. And we go, "Grandma, Grandma, Grandma," and she'd go, "How? How?" And I just thought that was hysterical that was her response. I would often say, like, you go, "Hey, Dad," and I go, "Yo." She'd go, "How?" Funny. Do you know where your mother's parents were born and grew up? Nope, I don't. I'm going to assume Carbondale, Scranton, somewhere in there. I do know that my grandfather grew up in and around the Pennsylvania coal mines because he died of black lung. I think it was like emphysema or cancer, but they called it black lung from working in the mines. So they all grew up in Pennsylvania area. And what were my grandparents like on my father's side? So my grandmother was a very harsh woman. My father called her mother, not mom, not hey mom, it was mother. And she was a hard woman, hard in discipline, hard in showing affection. She was just hard. I mean, I think she had a hard life, and that reflected in how she carried herself when up from the time that I knew her. She was also a clean freak fanatic. When we went to her house, you were not allowed to wear shoes in the house. You had to leave. You had to go through the garage to go into the house, and you had to leave your shoes in the garage. My father would tell me stories. She wore out a vacuuming so much. One of the things that she would say is never make a hot bed. So after you slept in the bed or after she slept in her bed, she would hang the sheets outside to air out, never make a hot bed. And she would wipe the lids of jars of whatever it was before she put it away. So God forbid you had peanut butter or jelly or something and a little bit slurped over the end of the jar and put it away. Oh no, you couldn't do that. You had to wipe and clean the lid and everything before you put it away. Her I just remember her house always being immaculate, not a speck of dust or dirt anywhere. It just that's how she was. What else about my grandmother? Yeah, I mean, I think I pretty much covered it. My grandfather, so I don't have memories of my grandfather, let's say the way he used to be. When my father was 18 or 19, I think somewhere around there, my grandfather suffered a mental breakdown because he left home when he was 13 years old. He was on his own since he was 13, and he worked at a dairy farm when he was a kid when he left home, and subsequently was the head, whatever you call the head person at a dairy farm. And when the person that owned the dairy farm decided to close it, the dairy farm was a tax write-off. I think it was the original owners of the W. Woolworth family, and the farm was a tax write-off. So when they finally decided to close the farm and just get rid of it, it was devastating to my grandfather, and he suffered a mental breakdown. I mean, we're talking mental institution, shock therapy, the whole bit, and he was never quite the same afterwards. So my memories of him every time I saw him when I was a kid is he would just sit in a chair and kind of stare off into space and really not say anything at all. He would just sit there. And, if you asked him a question or said something, maybe he would respond and talk back to you. But I remember, like, when I was a little kid saying to my dad, "What's wrong with Grandpa? Like he never, like, what's wrong with him? He never says anything. He doesn't talk. He doesn't do anything. He just will sit in a chair and just kind of stare off into space." And that's because he had a mental breakdown. And I'm assuming, in conjunction with the mental breakdown and shock therapy and everything else, he just wasn't completely there. And I said, "Do you know where your father's parents were born and grew up?" Again, somewhere around Northeast PA, Carbondale, Scranton, somewhere in that area they grew up. Let me see what am I doing on time? We're at 20 minutes. Okay, so I got a couple more minutes. What is some of the best advice your mother gave you? Always tell the truth, be yourself, and work hard. I'm sure that there's more things in there, but I just can't think of them. And the same thing with my father. Like, what was some of the best advice your father ever gave you? Same thing as what my mother would have said. I think my father always, told me, in addition to tell the truth, be yourself, and work hard, take care of your family. You know, being the responsible husband and father, it's important, and you know, you should do that. So that's it for what I have. The next video, we will continue with parents and grandparents, and then we're going to start on siblings. Ooh, that'll be fun. So for now, I will leave it at this. Thank you for watching the video. Have yourself a wonderful afternoon, and take care. Okay, bye.